We're back in action for the new year with some kitchen table astronomy from Hampshire College astronomer Dr. Salman Hameed, Mr. Universe, also the head of Kainaat Studios, also a board member for Amherst Cinema, and you gifted me an Amherst Cinema membership for the holidays, which was so nice. I already used it 1,000,000 times in the last month since I got it, and seen some great movies there. Marty Supreme, Hamnet, the new Knives Out movie, Wake Up Dead Man, and more exciting movies to come. And we're going to talk a little bit about the miracle, the wonderment of the big screen and the little screen, because we're going to talk in 2026 for our first official conversation about our favorite topic, aliens.
That's right, and I should mention, Monty, first of all, it's a pleasure to have you as our member at Amherst Cinema, and people should become members because, and I'm not just saying that because I'm on the board, but it is because it is a sort of a community-supported theater, and the kind of movies we see there, and yes, I'm there every week watching movies, so yes, I do spend a lot of time there, but you have to realize how lucky we are to get that many screens. So there are 3 screens with independent films there, so it's knowing behind the scenes a bit, like, we are extremely lucky to have a theater that plays these films. So yeah, if you're not a member, think about joining it, because membership largely supports Amherst Cinema.
And some of the movies we mentioned won Golden Globes this past weekend, including Marty Supreme and Timothée Chalamet in that movie. But another Golden Globe winner was Rhea Seehorn, who is in the Apple TV Plus television show, Pluribus.
Yes, and Rhea Seehorn, she should have won, in fact, earlier for her work in Better Call Saul. I think she was absolutely phenomenal in there. But of course, we are not talking about Better Call Saul, we are talking about Better Call Aliens, because, oh yes, I came up about it by myself, no. No, because Pluribus is a new show by the creators of Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, but it's a different show, and the premise of that, which I think it's really interesting, and when I don't want to spoil it, so for people who have not seen it, they should go in. We're going to talk a lot about the basic premise. It is on Apple TV, and the premise is that there is, first of all, a signal kind of came in from a particular planet, which I'm going to talk about in a second, and then most of the humanity, or I would say all of humanity, has been taken over by them, by aliens or whatever. The result of that is that almost the entire humanity, except for a few people, and when we are talking about a few people, we are talking about a few people, meaning to say about a dozen or so, except for a dozen people on Earth, everybody else is now connected together, as you can think of it as a hive mind, or are connected together. So that's the basic premise of Pluribus, and they're connected together because this is kind of like they are connected with this alien RNA that came from another planet. The signal came in through a radio telescope. And what is interesting is that Rhea Seehorn plays one of the people who are not connected. They don't know why 12 people or 12 or so people are not connected. And she is a writer of fantasy novels, and so that's the premise, that she's often unhappy. In pre-alien life, she was often unhappy. She was angry, and now she's encountering this alien hive mind, or humans.
A benevolent alien hive mind, and that's an important part of it. They're not, as far as we know, in season 1.
Well, we don't know. Okay, I don't want to give away anything, but the key thing is, then the premise is that they are nice, and
very, very nice.
In fact, this is a little bit of a premise, a little bit of the sort of like the philosophical discussion in there, which I think it's wonderful. Is that okay? So oftentimes people say, well, especially considering the political situation right now, well, I want world peace. Well, you have it. Okay, so I don't want...
These aliens have brought world peace. The hive mind knows everything in everybody's mind and all their memories and everything, and they are all working together in a peaceful manner.
But they also don't want to hurt anything or hurt anyone or hurt animals or hurt plants. I mean, so it's all of those things that you would consider as something that we should aspire to, or something that we often say, well, like, that we want to be nice to everyone, we don't want to hurt anyone, and we don't want any wars. Well, you have all of those things. Now, what the premise of this show does, and where the discussion of that takes a wonderful turn, is, okay, but the cost of that is this collectivism or collectivity versus individualism, and do you want to trade for that or not? And I think that is where, and again, we are not even giving any much away, because there are lots of twists and turns within the show, but ultimately this is where the discussion lies, whether being connected with everybody else and losing your individualism, and especially for Americans, individualism is so crucial. Is it worth world peace and being very nice and benevolence and all of that stuff is? And the answer is complex. I think that's what what the show does well, is that if you think that, oh, this is where the show is going to go, it actually usually doesn't. The show writers, Vince Gilligan, I mean, he's very smart, and I think he knows what he's doing, and so it's a smart what-if situation to discuss philosophical issues regarding individualism versus collectivism and what comes with that.
Now, the science behind it and the astronomy behind it, the first episode, and it's not giving too much away, a signal, as you mentioned, comes from outer space. It reminded me of Contact, the Carl Sagan movie and book, and they're trying to interpret this message from outer space. We have many times on this show talked about, hey, there's a weird thing coming from a star system. It might be some sort of intelligent being sending some message. Every single time, it turns out to have not been in our conversations. But in Pluribus, it turns out to be. There is a real planet/star system that is referenced in Pluribus.
Yeah, so they actually use Kepler 22b, and which is actually a real exoplanet, which was discovered in 2009, and as the name suggests, this planet was discovered by Kepler telescope through using the transit method, meaning to say when a planet goes in front of the star, you don't see the individual planet, but you see a dip in the light of the star, and that's how a lot of the exoplanets have been discovered. What is special about Kepler 22b is that it is what is called a super Earth, meaning to say it's about twice the size of the Earth. But what's most interesting is that it is orbiting around a star like our Sun, and at a distance which astronomers call a habitable zone, and so where water can stay in liquid form. So this is an exciting place, because if you are looking for potential habitability, where there would be a potential for life, this is a pretty good place, because water, we think, is essential, and if it is orbiting at a distance from its star where water can stay in a liquid form on the surface, then you are looking at a pretty good place. Now, we have no idea whether this is a rocky planet like the Earth. It is an ocean world, which, by the way, Pluribus imagines it to be possibly an ocean world. There is a later conversation about it. Or if it is like a Neptune, like a gaseous planet. We don't know anything about that. But this is a real planet, and it actually uses the right distance. It's around 640 light years away. So it's not that close either. So it's not like, hey, let's just wait a few years. For example, the Centauri star system, which is 4 light years away. So all you have to wait is like a few years. This one, they picked that it is far enough that you cannot have a constant communication with that. And
because it would take 640 years for their contact at light speed to reach us.
Right.
If we then interpret it, it would take another 640 years to send a message back. And it's the longest game of ping pong you have ever played.
And Marty Supreme would be terrible in that context.
Right.
So in Pluribus, it uses this premise that, okay, the message has come here, and it has brought in instructions for RNA, to build RNA. Now, this also I can connect it to more recent discoveries, including, for example, the ribose, the key molecule for RNA and ribonucleic acid, has been discovered in, for example, in asteroid samples that were brought in by one of the NASA missions, OSIRIS-REx. So, what the show is using, and I actually like that aspect, that you can be lazy and just bring that. Well, why care? Just say a planet, or just make up stuff. They are actually using actual exoplanet, an exoplanet that has the potential of life, and then the information that they are using about, for example, distance and all of those things, and about what scientists think what it might be. All of those things are real. Not to mention that in Pluribus, by the way, all information that anybody has, so in some sense, a 10-year-old can be an astrophysicist, because whatever astronomers know is shared by the entire human race in that sense. Except
so
for
an
the
8-year-old knows how to pilot a helicopter and also knows every known language on the planet and also can do open heart surgery, as can everybody else save these 12 people.
But it's not a silly premise. I mean, just watch it. I don't want to sound it like, oh, this is going to be crazy. I mean, one of the interesting things to me watching it coming from Pakistan, for example, I mean, some of these things we note in other cultures and other societies, the collectivism is a lot more. So, I mean, I grew up in a society where family structures are different. You have large families and they're dependent on each other. And yeah, I mean, this to us, it was always a little weird when we would hear, I mean, on TV, and then later on, of course, in real life, well, but it's what I want. Or as a kid, a 10-year-old or 12-year-old saying that to their parents, and in Pakistan it was like, you'd never say that. I mean, how dare you say that?
I'll just pause right here to say breakout star of Saturday Night Live, Marcelo Hernandez, has a new comedy special on Netflix where he says, as a kid growing up from Cuban parents, the show Full House, if you were a Cuban or an immigrant family, with like the 5 people that live in that house, they would have just called the show House. there was no full as part of it.
Yeah. Right. So I think that's the reason why, again, these questions of what is better. I mean, is it collectivism, it's all bad, or individualism always good? And especially in the current context of, I hate to bring it to the politics, but right now, the way the rich entrepreneurs are behaving, it's all about themselves and the individualism and things like that. There's a lot more critique of that now that is coming out. Nevertheless, people still think, especially within the Western context and the US context, individualism, what I want to do, but it's about me, right? But that's not necessarily true in other cultures, in other contexts, and even within the US you have a lot of diversity as well. But what is it? What is better? Well, Pluribus, I think, gets into some of those questions, and it's a wonderful show. First season is over, but second season is also licensed, so I think it would be really fantastic to see that.
If you watch Breaking Bad, it's not, at least at this point, nearly as dark or violent. It is fun and funny and light and interesting. And Stephen King, who's one of my favorite authors, urging Vince Gilligan to get going on season 2 because Stephen King says he's not getting any younger. And I agree. All right, so that's Aliens Part 1. Aliens Part 2 has to do with a recent death.
Yes, and I would say, Monty, I'm going to read you a quote. This is from a book that came out from this author who died recently. And he said in this book, "It took courage to write this book and will take courage to read it." Okay, now, does it remind you of, let's say, a current astronomer or astrophysicist who talks in the same way?
Well, it certainly does, especially if you know what the content of this book is. There is a little Avi Loeb-esque nature to it, perhaps with a lot less science. Avi Loeb is at least bringing a lot of science to the table.
So Avi Loeb is the Harvard astronomer, which we have to say contractually Harvard, yes, and he believes that, for example, the comet 3I Atlas, which is now moving away from our solar system, he believed that was an alien spacecraft. It would have come in, it would have left sort of like, probes, didn't come in. He believes that previous interstellar comets were also alien probes, on all of that stuff. But this particular type of, I would say, craze or this particular type of thinking is not new. And in fact, it was really popularized by a book that came out in 1968 by Erich von Däniken. He was from Switzerland, and he wrote a book called Chariots of Gods. And that book really brought in, if you think about all of these greatest hits, ancient aliens. So he believed, for example, that, the pyramids could not have been built by humans a few thousand years ago, but rather were actually built by an alien race that was trying to come in, and they needed directions to land or whatever, the reason he did that. Same thing with he would say, for example, in Delhi there is in India there is a temple which has a rod that hasn't been rusted as much, and he says, that is actually an extraterrestrial alloy made from intelligence. He looked at Nazca lines in Peru, and those are giant lines. I mean, those are amazing figurines which are of animal figures, and he says, they are all so big to see from the ground what those are. They must have been for the aliens, to communicate with the aliens and so on and so forth. And I have to say, I read it in the early 80s, and I loved Chariots of Gods. I was like, oh my goodness, this all makes sense. Not to mention that he actually brought in a lot of religious references as well. So the Wheel of Ezekiel, the story in the Bible, he said, actually that was an alien spacecraft, which actually now is a popular theory in certain circles. And so he himself sort of this was secularization of a lot of these ideas, but in some sense, as the New York Times obituary says it, he actually unified a lot of these religious ideas and spiritual ideas and all of that stuff together, and it's coming out in the late 60s, a perfect time for that, and it became a huge bestseller. I read it in Pakistan, and I was like, oh my goodness, this all makes sense. Right? Until I went to Carl Sagan, meaning when I started reading Carl Sagan, and he was like, wait a minute, you actually need a lot more evidence to claim, as he calls it, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And he was like, is that aliens is the only explanation on how to build pyramids? The base is so flat. Water can actually create that, actually really flat base. Or the Nazca lines, they were all the animal figurines. How would they have known? You can go up on the mountain and see those things. And so that actually really started, in some sense, a skepticism part of that. And Carl Sagan himself actually commented on Erich von Däniken. And this is a quote from him in which he was talking about Erich von Däniken. And Carl Sagan said, every time he sees something he cannot understand, he attributes it extraterrestrial intelligence. And since he understands almost nothing, he sees evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence all over the planet. Harsh, but true, because everything he would say, how would they have done? And the biggest problem in there is also shortchanging human intelligence, because humans are actually pretty intelligent creatures. So to say that 5,000 years ago, they would not know math, they would not know how to do this. No, they have been doing it. They're the same people as us.
Yeah.
And so
it had lots of time. It wasn't like they had to go home to watch Pluribus.
Exactly.
You got 400 or hundreds of years to build these pyramids if you want.
Yeah, take away the phones and look what we can do. We're not looking down. But he was influential in establishing. So if you are a big fan of ancient aliens, you have to thank Erich von Däniken for that, because that's where these ideas come from. There are also movies, for example, Prometheus by Ridley Scott. The basic premise is that life was seeded here on Earth by aliens. And so you can go on and on and on. A lot of fun stuff. Again, His book was written pretty fast. It's easy to read. Ancient astronaut ideas, like, that, well, some of the figures, well, they're wearing spacesuits. Well, no, but cool to think about it. And so he passed away at the age of 90 this past Saturday. I think hugely influential and hugely wrong.
Well, I think so too. But he brings up all of these interesting ideas that could be true, but just haven't been proven to be true. It is possible that this planet was seeded by a comet that had life on it, and that ancient alien thing could tie into the real origins of life on this planet. It is possible that the Wheel of Ezekiel was, thousands of years ago, something that was in the sky. There's no proof of that, but it's awesome to imagine that that's where all of these things came from.
And in the same way, I would again make a parallel, which is a little bit harsh, about Avi Loeb. Every interstellar comet that comes in, he goes like, well, this must be an alien. Well, because we don't have that many interstellar comets, and we are learning new things about it. And there are experts who actually study comets, who find these comets really interesting because they are not from our own solar system, but just because they are not from our own solar system and they exhibit properties that we cannot explain from comets that we know so far, doesn't mean that those are alien spacecrafts. And that's where I think the parallel comes in, that any anomaly that Avi Loeb sees in these comets, he attributes it to alien technology. And I think that's the parallel that comes in with Erich von Däniken, whereas Erich von Däniken didn't know that much about science in some sense, but anytime he would see as an amateur archaeologist, and he would go like, must be aliens. And so ultimately, I personally think that these things at a time where truth is paramount, and I would use the word truth, I shouldn't use the word truth lightly, but what I'm trying to say is importance of evidence is important. So because you have AI, you have fake videos, you have people the governments making all these claims. So as scientists, I think we should be careful on how we make claims, and otherwise we are going to lose trust in the process, which, like Erich von Däniken said, he's going against the establishment. He's saying, well, it took courage to write this book, and I love the bit, and it would take courage to read it too. Well, yes, if you are skeptical, yes, it would take a lot of courage. But the same thing goes with Avi Loeb as well, because the scientific establishment, and there are a lot of people who are experts in comets, what are they saying? And to actually take that out for for a bestseller or for other things, I think that becomes a problem.
Meanwhile, for fun, in the memory of the deceased Erich von Däniken, you can read that book and imagine what might have happened. And for more fun, the now Golden Globe award-winning television show Pluribus, an excellent alien story, a philosophy story, and very, very well done, and to look forward to in 2026. A Steven Spielberg alien movie is coming out too, so we got a lot of fun alien stuff to look forward to in 2026.
Hey, I saw the preview for Steven Spielberg. Okay, we're going to talk about it when it comes out. Okay. I'm going to reserve my judgment, but all I thought about when I saw the preview for the Steven Spielberg film, which is called Disclosure Day, my only thought was, wow, Pluribus is so amazing. And to me, Disclosure Day looked like somebody old school, talking about old school like aliens, versus Pluribus's much more sophisticated take on the aliens. But rest of it we will see when the movie comes out.